Welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is Matt.
And my name is James.
Welcome to episode 4 of our series on space, and we are searching for something this episode.
We are indeed.
First, we're going to be looking at Solaris from 1972, which is directed by Andrei Tarkovsky.
Yes.
Which is a well-regarded classic of sci-fi.
Yes, it's held in very high regard. It's quite a lengthy feature, but one I'm sure we will be delving into in depth throughout the episode. And the other film we're looking at today is Europa Report from 2013. So this is a lot lighter, but it's still quite a worthy film to be talking about in our space series.
Yeah, they're looking for two very different things. The search is very different, I think, in these two films.
Yeah, one's a bit more sort of like introspective, and the other one's more, you almost take it more literally in the way they're sort of doing it. But we'll get into that throughout the episode. So, shall we start with Solaris then, Matt?
Let's get started. So Solaris is an absolute monster of a sci-fi movie.
What did you think of Solaris first off, Matt? Because I can imagine your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I get bored easily. I've seen it before. Have you seen it before?
This was my first time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to hear that. No, I just mean it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
I've seen it once before. And I was surprised. I'm surprised to say that I felt exactly the same way about it.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to enjoy it a lot more because I think it is such hard work, in my opinion, that once you've already seen it once, you can kind of like just get into the feel of it and not be too worried about the slow pacing. But I felt exactly the same way, which is that I really do like it. It's just really long and boring. and I hold those two opinions.
I had the complete opposite. I loved it.
Too short, you felt?
No, I just like... No, I think it was the right length. I don't think it needed to be any longer. I was worried about going into it with it being so long. I know there's this thing now where people are not so willing to give up that amount of time to watch one film.
Yep.
Like this is a big thing sort of like among cinema goers and that kind of thing. That's why the average film is like an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes. I think an hour and 45 minutes is the American audience span.
I don't know. I'd say... more recently, that average is creeping up. I think films are getting longer again.
Yeah, I think with more some of your blockbusters and things like that. But I think it's been a thing for a while that an hour and 45 is the sort of like attention span of your average audience.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
yeah, no, I really liked it. And I think I just loved the way Tarkovsky does everything, really. And it really sort of sucked me in. And the cinematography was great. The colours, everything just like really got me involved. And I was watching it in the dark on my own. I think I was in the right state of mind to be watching it. I had the time to sit down and properly absorb it all. So I wasn't like, oh, I've just got back from work. I've got to like do this, got to do that. I was like, no, I set out some time, sat there and really let it sort of like just wash over me.
That's good. I mean, that is good. That's the best way to watch it.
Yeah, I think it's the only way to watch it as well.
Yeah, I had less ideal circumstances to watch it. First of all, I had to watch it on my laptop for various reasons. Not the best way to watch a film.
Yep.
I wasn't rushed, but I was a bit like, I just finished work and I had to cook dinner, and I was aware of like, you know, as I was cooking dinner, I was like, I need to start this film soon because I need to go to bed at some point.
Because it's so long.
It's so fucking long. So that doesn't help. And then when you're going into it with that mindset, when there's like a 5-minute sequence when literally nothing happens, I do get a bit resentful of the movie. But I still like it. I know that's a bit contradictory, and I do find it boring and slow, but there's some really good stuff in it. And it's good sci-fi.
Yeah. And you can see sort of like why it's held in such high regard.
Have you seen?
If you can't see how it's held in such a high regard, I am going to explain it to you throughout the episode.
Good. Okay. I'm looking forward to that a little bit because I don't know if I get it.
Yeah, I'm going to gush over this film. Trust
Good.
me.
What other Tarkovsky films have you seen? I know that we've both seen Mirror.
Yeah. So this is the other thing. I loved Mirror.
Yeah, we watched it at university, and you're the only person I know who liked it at all.
Everyone else that we watched that film with hated it.
Yeah,
They thought it was slow and
It is slow.
boring,
It is
and
boring.
nothing happened.
nothing happens.
I don't know what happened. Maybe it's just something that when I watch Tarkovsky's work,
It
I go
sounds
into a
like
different place.
I mean, the way you were talking about it just then, you like the way it's shot and the way he sort of just shows things, which is it's hard to look at sometimes, just because just so little is happening sometimes.
It's like you go on a little daydream sometimes when it's all going on and sort of stuff's unfolding, and you can let your mind just drift out of it. But if you're sort of focused on what's going on
Yeah,
in the film, you kind of get more into it.
and the films are very daydreamy.
Yeah,
The ones that
that's it.
I've seen. So I've seen this. I've seen Mirror, but only at university. I've seen Stalker. That's the other big sci-fi one.
Yeah,
by
I
him.
haven't seen Stalker, but I've heard really good things about it.
Well, I think you'll like it based on what you're saying. I feel the exact same way about Stalker as I feel about Solaris. It is really good. It's very long. It's very slow.
Yeah.
I think Solaris is more conventionally sci-fi than Stalker. So what I remember of Stalker is you don't see a lot of sci-fi stuff. You're told that it's happening in this post-apocalyptic world, and you learn a lot about that. But from what I remember, it's just sort of shot in desolate areas,
Yeah.
but not particularly sci-fi-ish. They're in like an irradiated zone in a post-apocalyptic sort of scenario. But it doesn't really look any different than them getting a train to a place in the middle of nowhere and going on a bit of a hike.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that kind of stuff is all because we talked about sort of like film auteurs previously, and Tarkovsky really brings a lot of himself into his films, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And being born in Russia and growing up in sort of like around the sort of Soviet Union, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He brings all that forward in his films. You talk about sort of like the desolate landscapes and stuff. This is all sort of him bringing parts of Russia's past to the screen, and I'm guessing that kind of thing comes forth in Stalker.
Yeah, I think so. And it's a post-apocalyptic film. I can't remember when it was made. I think it's one of his later ones, isn't it?
Stalker it was after this. It was after Solaris, so it's 1979.
Right. So it's late Cold War, but he's a guy who's grown up in the Cold War and lived in the Cold War, and yeah, the threat of a post-apocalyptic wasteland is on his mind. So that feeds into Stalker quite heavily. But there's a lot about like this film and Mirror, and I haven't really seen the other ones, but I know they're sort of very reflective films.
Yeah.
He focuses on like the nature of memory, and
Yeah, it's all very focused on that, isn't it?
and he's interested in the way it's presented on screen, isn't he? Mirror's entirely about that, from what I remember.
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's a memory film.
Yeah, because Mirror's all about a man who's dying, and he's like remembering his past and his childhood, and sort of like all these different memories are shown through the film. So, and this is what happens in Solaris as well. This is a filmmaker who's obsessed with the idea of memory and dreams and sort of like dreamscapes and sort of like the metaphysical and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that comes through in his films, doesn't it? And especially in this one.
Yeah. There's a very straightforward sci-fi plot in this, which is there's some scientists on a space station. They might have gone insane. Chris, the main character, is sent there to determine if the whole thing should be destroyed or not. But yeah, the whole memory thing running underneath that is what if a person's memories came to life? What would that thing be? And what would it be like, and how would it behave?
Yeah.
And is that thing the real person, or is it a new entity?
And I feel like this film has a lot of sort of connections to when we did our series on artificial intelligence. It's got artificial intelligence has lots of themes of memory and sort of creating memories and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the value of a lived experience, and memories, are they are they just a thing that sort of can be implanted and has no value, or is the value of a memory the same as the value of an emotion?
Yeah, and I know there's a film called Marjorie Prime, which seems to have quite a lot of similarities to Solaris. I haven't seen it myself, but gathering from the main premise, the premise of that one is this woman who's in sort of later stages of her life, she is bringing back a hologram of her husband, and it's all done through her memories. So it's kind of, that's the projection of what her husband was like to her.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's a book, I don't want to get it wrong because I don't really know anything about the plot, but the guy who wrote The Explorer, he's got a book called The Machine, which I think might be somewhat about that premise. It's a machine that either you download a personality into or you construct a personality in. And that's sort of the central premise, but I haven't read that one. He's got a lot of, I've only read those two, The Explorer and the sequel, The Echo. But he's got lots of books with like great sci-fi concepts. I don't think he's exclusively a sci-fi author, but he's got a lot of like interesting sci-fi concepts.
Yeah, definitely something worth checking out then.
Yeah. And his name's James Smith or Smythe. Smith, I think. Smythe.
Okay, so James Smith/Smythe.
Yeah, I think it'd be
is
Smith,
the guy to check out.
But he's very good. Yeah, recommend.
I mean, The Explorer is definitely recommended.
Yeah. So Solaris.
So the central character of the film, the protagonist, is a guy called Chris Kelvin, and he's going into space onto this planet Solaris. And you said like it's like quite a straightforward sci-fi plot from the sort of like from outside looking in.
Yeah, straightforward, but it's a good concept.
Yeah.
The straightforward thing is, do we shut down the mission or not? You need to go and find out. And then the great twist on top of that is the planet itself that the station is next to might be driving people insane just by proximity to it. So
what is he searching for in space? Because like the theme of this episode is sort of searching for something, because that's the main draw to going into space, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everybody's going out there and they're looking for something. They're looking to find out something. So what is Chris's character?
So I don't think Chris is really portrayed as someone who is really searching for something at the start of this film. He's set up as, he's criticized by a former astronaut who was on the station. Who calls
Burton,
him,
isn't it?
Yeah, Burton. So Burton kind of introduces the concept by he goes to visit Chris before Chris sets sail to Solaris, and he plays him a video of his Burton's testimony of when he was on Solaris and had hallucinations, and everyone thought he was insane and kind of ruined his life by the looks of it. And he's trying to convince Chris to. I'm not sure what he actually wants Chris to do. Whether he wants him to not go to Solaris or he just wants the project to be reinvigorated rather than... I mean, Chris's primary mission is really to shut it down.
Yeah. I think he's trying to make Chris believe in what he saw when he was up there, because he knows Chris is going to go to Solaris, and he already knows from his own experience, Burton's own time being up there, and sort of like... Cause he's flying a ship up there or something, isn't he, in the story?
Flying a ship down on the planet's surface, I think, right? He goes down, but he's already in search of someone else who's gone missing. He's part of the rescue party, and then he has to be rescued, and the original guy is never found again. And he has this insane hallucination of a 4 meter tall naked baby that's like floating up and down on the waves, formed out of the description's so good, a boiling solid, right? Like a bubbling, boiling foam that turns solid into the shape of a baby and a load of barren trees.
It's crazy, isn't it? That sort of image that... Yeah. And he's doing that, and it's all very intense, that story.
Yeah.
Because we'll talk a little bit about sort of the use of colour in the film later on, but it's got like a blue filter on, and it's really drawing you in. It's just this character, Burton, and his face telling the story.
For the most part, but he keeps getting interrupted by scientists who are ostensibly just asking questions scientifically, but they're challenging his story in a pretty disbelieving way, and they do it by looking straight down the barrel of the camera. So it's proper eye contact with the audience and Burton, the character who they're talking to. It's very like confronting.
Yeah, and it's all supposed to be on a TV screen, isn't it? It's like was
Chris
that what
is
was watching
happening?
It felt like that initially.
I thought so. Yeah.
It's like, but then it kind of went into a whole nother scene, and because they don't frame it like it's a a screen, it becomes a scene in itself. And I thought that was quite an interesting way of doing things.
Oh, you mean because they were watching the video?
Yeah.
I also wasn't sure if all of the people in the video were in the same room or if there was some telecommunication on their end. You know, some of the scientists asking questions were actually looking into a camera because it was broadcasting to where Burton was. I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Do you
But
think they were in the same room? Or?
I initially thought they were all in the same room, but it's interesting that you came away thinking that as well. And I mean, you could read it either way, and it might be that it was like a big video conference. It's just the way of telling that visually is sort of like done in an interesting way where it doesn't quite match up, maybe.
Yeah, I do find a lot in these Tarkovsky films where I don't know if I'm reading into something interesting and confusing or I'm just being confused by something I wasn't supposed to be confused by.
Yeah.
You know, like that could be a very straightforward scene. I don't know. So Chris's point of view is that there's really two options. He's going to go up there and it's either destroy the station outright or fire intense radiation at the planet to destroy the planet.
Yeah.
It's very much like, I'm going up there, but either way, this mission is ending and I'm destroying it. And Burton calls him, he's like, he's not a scientist, he's just an accountant. You know, he's very critical of him. So in terms of like Chris's search, he's at the start of the film not painted as like this inquisitive scientific mind. He is just like, I'm going up there, I'm shutting this thing down, end of story.
See, it's also kind of like his search is more, he's trying, it's more of an emotional one, isn't it? And what he's going through, because he's in a stage of his life where he's kind of running away from things. This is what I got from the film anyway.
I definitely agree, but how much of that was clear until he gets to Solaris?
Yeah, well, you get that as the film goes on, but you know, the place where he is at the beginning is his family home, and he's staring out at that sort of green river.
I'm not 100% sure it is his family home. Doesn't he say something about
Well, it's his dad.
it's his but they loved his dad's cabin, so they rebuilt it? Am I misremembering this?
No, because that's his granddad's cabin. So Chris's dad is the other guy.
Yeah.
The old guy who's with Burton, who
Right.
obviously knows Burton for
Yeah,
some
yeah.
reason. So Chris's dad is very much like he wants to live with the past. So he says that line which you just mentioned about his, I want to make this house like my grandfather's house because I have my father's house because I have such good memories of it.
So Chris's dad's house is an identical reconstruction of Chris's granddad's house.
Yes.
Right, okay. I got
There
that
you go.
a little bit wrong. Right. But
so-
he's living in that. Is it his Chris's childhood home then?
Yeah,
Right.
At least that's what I took from it.
Yeah.
And but Chris won't look at the house at the start. He's looking at the reflection in the river.
Oh, yeah.
So he doesn't look at the actual thing. He's kind of looking at the memory of it, and he can't quite face that home and sort of like the memories that leads to of his past life, which obviously leads him to the memories of his wife, who died, Hari, who you find out about later on as the film progresses.
You pick up on all of that first viewing when you're watching the
I
reflection in
did
the
do
lake.
some reading
Okay,
afterwards
right.
because
That's
I was
very
like,
good analysis.
there's lots of stuff in there, and I was like, I wanted to find out more.
That's essay quality analysis.
But it's like I
James.
knew you could tell there's all this stuff going on.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like trying to digest it.
What did you make of him washing his hands in the lake or the river? It's like one of the first things he does.
After he's burnt the photo of Hari, doesn't he? So he's kind of like trying to wash his hands of it. He's trying to sort of like get rid of those memories.
Yeah, but it's not just any washing your hands, is it? I think there's something quite it's very deliberate to wash your hands in a natural body of water. You know, there's other ways to wash your hands. Like it's you don't see that on film very much. It's not set in a time where they don't have running water or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I didn't quite know what to make of it because there is all this, you know, it starts with shots underwater and it kind of like expands from there. There's this focus on nature that's in a lot of his films, or, well, the ones I've seen. And then to have your character wash his hands in the natural body of water. And yeah, there is that kind of emotional washing your hands of something in your past that we don't quite know about yet. But the choice of where he did it was interesting as well.
Yeah, because again, it's that sort of like nature element, and the whole film is sort of like juxtaposed between images of nature and sort of like the natural world, and then images of this futuristic sort of like satellite or the station that they're on, and all these sort of like weird images coming from Solaris, like the swirling rivers and pools on Solaris. Again, really intense colors and like it's all very engrossing.
Yeah. I was just a little bit disappointed with how minimalist it was. And I think it's I don't know if that's a reflection of the budget available in 1970s Russia or Tarkovsky's chosen style to be extremely minimalist. It just following the intensity of Burton's story, where he's describing bubbling foam coming out of the yellow ocean, I think.
Yeah.
It's so vivid, and then we never see any of that. And I understand why they probably didn't have the resources to create a 4-meter tall baby floating on the waves, but like to then the only imagery we get of the ocean, and that is important to the plot, isn't it? That we can't capture these visions that they're having, and that's why no one believes it back home. But yeah, it was we never really get anywhere with it until maybe the very end of the film. You see a bit of, ocean, but I wasn't really convinced by it. I don't know. Maybe it's just I was so bored. I just wanted some cool.
I want some special effects.
Yeah,
Give me some whiz bangs.
Yeah.
No, I can see that because, it is very slow paced and he lingers on things to sort of make you. He wants you to think about stuff, but then if you're not doing that, then you're not gonna get that from the film, and it can be a bit of a slog if you're sort of not getting that from it.
Yeah. I don't think Tarkovsky would like me.
So the film's divided into two parts.
Yeah.
What did you think about the sort of divide in the film? So the part one comes up pretty much at the start, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Part one takes us from Earth to Solaris, and I think part one ends just after Hari shows up. Is that right?
So part one ends with the appearance of Hari, and then part two begins with sort of him getting to know Hari. But the first thing he chooses to do is put her in a rocket and tries to kill her.
Yeah, it's quite intense.
Hari looks exactly like his dead wife.
Yeah.
And she sort of appears out of nowhere. But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves again. So he goes up to Solaris. He goes up to the space station. I found it interesting the way they chose to show the space travel.
It's just a close-up on Chris's face.
Yeah, it's a close-up, and they say there's he says, oh, they're not going to do a countdown or a lift-off.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, you're already traveling there now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of this weird vision of space travel where it kind of just happens instantaneously. And then suddenly you're in this other world, you're on this space station, and it's just all in one go. So it's different to the other films we've watched previously where the actual lift-off is such a profound thing.
Yeah, space is used as more of a wildernessy destination instead of a means of travel and a sort of landscape for travel. Travel is not important, or physical external bodies traveling through space is not important, but traveling through our memories is what Tarkovsky's more interested in.
Yeah, and it's kind of that dreamscape thing again, isn't it? Because in a dream, you imagine yourself in one place and another place, and it's all sort of instantaneous.
Yeah.
So again, it's kind of, he's bringing that to this idea of space.
So he arrives at Solaris Station, and it's a complete dump. It looks amazing.
Yeah.
Whatever money this film had behind it, all into that set, wasn't it? It's a great set. It looks incredible.
And did you get a sense of relief when they were on the space station?
Relief?
Because I was kind of watching the film from the start, it's quite heavy going, isn't it? And there's all this sort of build up to actually going to space. As soon as they got on the space station, I was like, right, we're in a sci-fi film now.
Okay, I got what you mean.
I'm comfortable now.
Yeah, that's what I meant when I said it's a very conventional sci-fi film for Tarkovsky. It looks like a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
After about an hour.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're dropped into something very familiar, and it starts to play with the tropes that we're very familiar with. Yeah.
So you talked about the way the space station looks. Were there any things you picked up on in particular?
I mean, there's literally rubbish everywhere.
Yeah.
It's serious disrepair. We've been told that it's big enough to house 85 people. So it's a pretty big space station. And it's just these 3 guys, as far as Chris is aware, living on it. And they've completely turned the place into a dump. It looks awful. Panels hanging off the walls and stuff.
Panels. There's electrical wiring, like sparks coming off of it and things like that.
Yeah.
And there's these weird sort of panels, these weird sort of rectangular computer things, like cupboards
Do you mean in the rounded
in
corridors?
the round bit. What do you think? Because they're all wonky.
Were they?
Yeah, they all sort of like move on one side. You know? Do you know which ones I mean? When he's going around, sort of like the round,
And it's like endless repeating pattern of small like knobs and stuff. Yeah, I think I know the ones. I didn't realize they were like wonky.
Yeah, they're all sort of like come up at a slant, and I didn't know if that was a deliberate thing, the way it was made, or if it's kind of again sort of this weird dreamlike station and this sort of adding to that.
I thought the panels themselves had a bit of a dreamlike quality to them because just on a practical level, there are hundreds of panels. You wouldn't line your space station with things to interact with just in the corridors and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, there's too much stuff going on. It makes it look very surreal.
But it's this weird sort of like surreal elements, and it's made even more surreal by how normal some of the rooms look. Because there's rooms in this space station which look just like they're places on Earth. They've got like candles.
Yeah, there's certainly towards the end of the film we spend a long time in a, how would you describe it? Like a library? I
Yeah, it
guess?
feels like a library or a study.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a big sort of meeting room, like
And
a classy meeting
Yeah,
room.
and it doesn't really look like any other room on Solaris Station. It's very much a different world down there.
Yeah. And again, this sort of like juxtapositioning of the weird futuristic and the more sort of like natural world almost comes to the forefront with that kind of imagery.
Yeah.
So yes, we talked about the other people on the space station. So what did you think about these other characters? Because they all study different fields, don't they? I can't remember exactly what everybody studies, but...
I'll tell you. So Sartorius is an astrobiologist.
So he's the quite clinical guy.
He's a real dick.
Yeah, he's a real dick.
Snout is a cyberneticist. Not
Okay.
entirely sure what a cyberneticist does.
Yeah.
Works with cybernetics, which I don't
Yeah, that's
quite
what confused
understand.
me.
Yeah, what he'd be doing on the station.
Well, he's up there.
He's doing something.
He's quite a fun-loving guy.
And a physiologist, Gibarian,
Yeah.
who is dead when Chris gets there, and that's Chris's friend. He's the only one that Chris knows personally.
Yeah, so he's killed himself.
He's killed himself by the time Chris gets there, and Chris is really shocked by that. He wasn't aware. And it kind of sounds like he's killed himself since... Yeah, he's killed himself since hearing that Chris is coming, because he leaves like a suicide video note to Chris. Snout has company.
Yep.
Snout, I think, is the most seemingly insane one of the ones that are still alive. Gibarian has killed himself because of very serious depression, we're told.
Yeah.
Snout seems to be losing his grip on reality.
Yeah.
Sartorius, when we finally meet him, he's a bit mad scientist.
He just
right?
wants to be left alone, doesn't he?
He's got a dwarf that he's keeping locked in his room.
That confused me so much.
Yeah.
He just pops out. I think I was looking at something else when it happened, and then suddenly so basically when you meet Sartorius, he's holding the door closed, says you can't come in, and then he goes out to talk to Chris. Somewhere out of nowhere, this dwarf, this smaller person, comes out.
Yeah.
And
He just picks him up and pops him back in the room and then shuts the door again. Yeah.
And that is such a bizarre image just to pop out of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very surreal.
And it never gets referenced again.
It never gets... Well, it only a little bit in there. So Snout's also got company. Snout's a bit more willing to talk to Chris when he arrives.
Yeah.
But not terribly patient with him. Kind of, I think, just wants Chris to get up to speed with what the deal with Solaris is very quickly. He hasn't got the time to sort of kid glove him. He's got company, but Chris only gets a glimpse. It's that he's got a hammock above him, and just as Snout's asking him to leave, it twitches and he sees a person's ear rolling over, and then he's pushed out. So they've both got company, and we just get glimpses of both of them. The only reference we get is a little bit later. I think Snout's the one that vocalizes it, but he says that Chris is so lucky that his guest, they call them guests, is Hari, who is, a version of his wife.
Yeah.
So it's kind of implied that, whether Sartorius knows this little person or not, they've just got guests and they don't really have the same connection. They would have much rather a woman from their past or a woman from their present,
because there's sort of going back to the story that Burton tells back on Earth, that baby that he sees turns out to be a child which he meets when he's back on Earth.
Yeah, the child of... So there's one scientist that slightly believes Burton's story and is giving him a bit of leeway. And so he goes to meet that scientist on Earth, and he's got a kid, and it's the exact same kid, but he saw it 4 meters tall, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, with that kind of the memory thing, they're not just memories from your past, presumably, they're memories from your future as well. In the case of Burton, at least.
That's never made clear.
It's not made clear, but it's kind of like, I might be jumping to conclusions, but it's kind of that, it might be along those kind of lines.
Well, it's a kind of an important question to try and figure out what Solaris is and what it's doing. And I guess a key question there that we might not have the information for is the professor's child alive when Burton is on Solaris and there's some sort of connection that it's reaching out across, massive distances to reach the professor's mind?
Yeah.
Or is it capable of seeing into the future? And there's quite a big difference there, but I don't think we're given any.
Yeah, you're not given any of the kit to sort of like figure that out,
No.
are you?
No, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's it, because this film does make you think a lot, and it's kind of one of those ones where you look back and there's extra things you can take away from it.
The other guys are a little bit jealous that Hari is Hari and not just a random. There's also something special about her, right? It's kind of implied that because there is such an intense connection, Hari is the most evolved of the guests. And what are the guests? Let's get into that. What are the guests?
So the way that Sartorius describes them is they're made up of neutrinos. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know if that's a helpful explanation.
So they're all made of neutrinos, but they always refer to them sort of like as like goo almost, don't they? They say something like that. But whatever they're made up of, it's not what humans are made up of.
Yeah.
So they're a different kind of life form. And to Sartorius, that instantly makes them not human and lesser than human. So he treats them more as lab experiments.
Yeah, he wants to do some quite cruel experiments on Hari.
Yeah, which Chris is not on board for. Yeah, because he says they're like, there's one line which Chris says where he says, that mass of jelly has already invaded my soul. So he refers to Hari as a mass of jelly, all these neutrinos, and the fact that she looks like his dead wife is kind of like has an effect on him emotionally.
Yeah. But he also asks her, because she keeps getting injured.
Yeah.
And it's I didn't quite understand why, but it's very affecting and traumatic for all the characters when it happens. I think it's tied up with his memories of, because she died and he found the body. So this projection, so they're described as projections of our conceptions, is that right?
Yeah.
And it's a projection from the planet, or specifically they talk about it being a projection from the ocean. It's the ocean itself.
Of Solaris, isn't it?
So less of the way I remembered this film was it's kind of a living planet thing, but they're very specifically talking about the ocean as the thing that might be a living brain.
And that brings it back to the concept of nature as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, because I thought the reason she kept getting injured was they've got that connection, and then when he's too far away, she starts dying. So that happens all the time. So that's why later on he has to run back and check the doors open so she can be within a safe distance.
Right. Okay. Yeah, you're right. They do say that. I took that too vaguely because I was understanding. Oh, she can't survive if he's far away. I thought it would be more of a sort of fading into nothingness.
Yeah.
But she would show up with all these cuts on her. So is that the actual representation?
Yeah, she's like the first time that happens and he leaves the room, she's like trying to break down the door because she is dying.
Yeah.
Because they're not close enough to each other. She can't see him at that point. And as they kind of imply that she becomes more human as it goes on.
She insists on it. The end. Yeah.
So as she becomes more human, she can be further away from him for a longer time period and that kind of thing. So it kind of like that sort of develops as it goes on.
Yeah. But not to the point where she could be independent, because the kind of resolution of the film is that Chris decides that he would not be able to leave the station because he wants to be with her.
Yeah.
Have you seen the remake? I think the remake might be a bit more explicit or takes a different route to explaining what the guests are.
I think I saw it a long time ago.
I think a couple of characters in this speculate on it. And I think the remake goes a bit more into detail about the idea of the planet or the ocean is trying to communicate through a physical manifestation. That's hinted at, and I think some people speculate on what might be happening, but we don't get much further than that, do we?
No, not really.
So if that's what's going on, if we take that at face value, the ocean is trying to communicate with the humans, and it might be reactive communication, or it might be proactively reaching out. Does it want something? Is the ocean searching for something out there, or is it just like a response to a type of life being near it?
It's interesting because the whole thing is, the whole premise is it's a mirror, isn't it? It's a reflection of what humanity is. And I don't think the film's looking at this like alien entity as its own sort of like consciousness necessarily, but it kind of does develop into that. It's basing itself on what humans are like.
I agree. I think it is reacting to the humans being there, and I think it's a natural sort of evolved response that I don't think the ocean has its own consciousness. Like you said, we sort of see it as a mirror, and meta-textually it's a mirror to the people, the characters. But I think if you're trying to look at it from a sci-fi, like what's this being? Yeah, I think it's just like a natural reaction. But I think that projected natural automatic reaction in Hari is starting to become a sentient thing in its own way. And there's something about the combination of the way this ocean reacts to human memory and imagination, combined with the intensity of Chris's grief over his wife. There's like a bit of a chemical reaction there, which creates a guest that is so much more than any other guest that showed up.
And Hari sort of like develops her own memories as well, doesn't she? Because she's living on the space station for an amount of time, and she's having experiences with Chris around the station. And it's kind of like, because consciousness in its core, I think, so I watched a little YouTube video, and it's sort of like about the philosophy of this film and that kind of thing. And it's talking about, like, so John Locke, not from Lost, the actual philosopher, he said something like, so consciousness is basically memory. So if she's got memories of Hari and she's having her own memories, is that sort of her developing a consciousness through that?
Yeah, and it raises the question of whose consciousness is it? Is it Hari's? Or is it a completely new thing?
Yeah, but because the thing is, because Hari's a entity that's made up of someone else's memories of somebody else.
Yeah.
So the way everybody sort of like gets paranoid about what other people think about them and that kind of thing. And this is literally a person created by what's everybody else has thought of you. So I thought that sort of like idea was really interesting as well.
What, you think everybody else? Or just Chris?
Well, Chris's perception. Yeah. So Chris's memories are what create Hari.
Yeah.
So Hari is only what Chris knows of her. There's no way to know like that she has the same sort of like thoughts and that kind of thing as Hari.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, does that make her real or not?
Yeah, and she's a little bit idealized as well because of that. So Chris likes her better, basically. Yeah. And there's a good reason for that. Like he got to a point where he walked out on his wife. They were having so many arguments and it got so bad he walked out, and then she killed herself. And now all that Chris has is his memories of her. So obviously when a being is created just from the memories, it's going to be all the good stuff.
Yeah.
There's still, it kind of touches on the grief and the trauma and all of that, but none of the fights are really coming out, and they're actually, he believes that they could have a better relationship now.
And he says he loves her more than he loved the other Hari, because he said he didn't, at that point he wasn't in love with the old Hari when she killed herself. And that's part of the reason the original Hari killed herself, was because, well, in his mind anyway, is that she knew that they'd fallen out of love. So that's what she went and did.
Yeah, but I think Chris is seeing it in a bit of a you don't know what you've got until it's gone kind of thing. And he's not really recognizing that she's created from his best memories of her. You know, it's a bit of a rose-tinted spectacles thing for him.
I mean, also like the thing, he kills the first version of this new Hari as well. So that was quite an extreme reaction. And again, that goes to show sort of like this, if it's an alien, if it's another creature, the first thing he chooses to do is kill it.
He's been a bit primed for it. Everyone's warning him, you know, there's just us three on board. If you see anything else, don't trust it.
Yeah.
So his first reaction is, shit, it's something that looks like my ex-wife. Someone's trying to mess with me. Someone knows how much grief I feel about seeing this person, right?
Yeah.
Is that the reaction, or is it just...
Yeah, I think so, because he's confused as well. Yet he kind of puts on like a false persona at the start when he's kind of like getting to know this new version of Hari. He's hiding stuff from her. It feels like in the performance anyway. He's sort of telling her stuff just because he knows that's what she wants to hear, because she's that perception of his wife that he has. It's all sort of like, it's strange, isn't it?
It's a bit of a spy film relationship in those first scenes, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
You've got this mysterious woman who he wants to be attracted to and he wants to get with, basically, but he's incredibly cautious and he's got this thing weighing above it saying, don't trust this woman, she's not what she appears to be. That's the kind of Cold War spy dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah. And with the spy sort of elements as well, he gets rid of her by putting her in a rocket, and that seems like something out of a James Bond film, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, the relationship is very James Bondy. He's there, he's got a mission, right? And he's being cold and clinical about it, but he likes her, he fancies her, you know.
I mean, the best scene of the two of them is that moment where there's no gravity for like from 5 a.m. or something, they say, don't they? And it's just this moment.
Changing orbit.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the moment where he realizes that she's become more human. That happens, and they've got this beautiful moment where they're just floating around and Hari's in his arms, and then they sink back onto the ground, like reality sets in, and the first thing Hari does is tries to kill herself again.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she drinks like liquid nitrogen, doesn't she?
Yeah.
And it's like that came out of left field for me. I was like, they're finally having this relationship, and then suddenly the first thing she does is kill herself again.
Is that the remnant of Chris's bad memories of her creeping back in?
It could be.
Because she's constructed from these memories, and, you know, it is mostly the good stuff because that's what he would be focusing on, but he can't maybe fully escape the memory of what he thinks he did to her.
Yeah. It's tricky because it depends on how you view Hari as well. If Hari at this point is human, or at least as close as she can be, is it her sort of realization that she can never be this person who she is sort of like based on, so all she can choose to do is kill herself? Is that kind of the idea as well?
Whether that's an expression of free will or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be that, or it could be that, she's kind of constructed on this basis of, she also could be an independent sentient being, but one that is constructed on a series of memories, which includes the memory of her killing herself out of, you know, whatever was going through her mind in those final days.
And so the whole idea of memory as well, I think that Tarkovsky displays this in his colours and his colour palette throughout the film. So what did you think of the use of colours throughout, like the blue tints and the black and white bits? And what do you think about all that?
I thought they couldn't afford to shoot the whole thing in colour.
What an explanation.
No, I mean, I think that there might be some truth in that, but they certainly use it. They use the black and white tinted footage for flashbacks, memories, video calls, stuff like that. They separate it out and it becomes its own alternate world.
That's it. And I feel like it's kind of like it verges more on that memory aspect because you remember things in a different kind of way. And it's kind of like signifying that through the visuals.
Yeah.
And I remember the the scene we talked about with Burton. That's the first instance where you see sort of the black and white, but it's blue tinted.
Yeah.
And having black and white blue tint and then going out of that into colour, it's quite shocking. So like there's the bit where Burton's travelling home and you go into sort of like the big busy streets.
Oh, God.
And
where they're
back.
driving for like 10 minutes.
It's really intense, but I loved it. And then you've got like the swirling colours of the planet and the sort of like the green, the natural green sort of like algae or whatever it is in the rivers and all this kind of stuff. And it's just like, it just really stood out to me.
Yeah.
And again, it makes it more sort of like dreamlike. The dream sort of like scape comes through with all these different colours.
So when else do they go back to black and white and tinted stuff later in the film?
They definitely do it a few times, but I can't think of offhand.
Is there a scene where he's the bonfire scene?
Yeah.
It's the bonfire video, actually. He makes a point of saying, he wants to take the bonfire video with him. He tells his dad not to destroy, don't get rid of the bonfire video. I'm going to take that with me. And then later in the film, we see that bonfire video, and it's kind of presented as like old family home video, but it's all edited and stylized. So
and then Hari pops up in the story, but then is it her perception of her seeing herself in that? Because she's suddenly there in the home video, but it doesn't match up because it's a young version of Chris.
That's right.
That video. And then Hari's getting memory because Chris is thinking about that. Hari's remembering what Chris's mother was like, even though he says, "Oh, you never met my mother."
That's another black and white bit as well. He has a whole extended sort of dream sequence remembering his mother, and he's supposed to be a little boy or a young man, but he's played by the same guy. He's talking in a slightly higher register, like
to be more childlike.
Yeah, and his mum like washes his arm for him, and
yeah. So like more and more of this stuff happens, and then he decides he wants to stay on the station, doesn't he?
Yeah, because Hari at this point believes I'm a full human being. I could survive without Chris. I think Chris doesn't buy that, and he says, "I'm going to stay with you, and I want to be with you. I want to stay on the station."
Yeah, he's kind of descending into the madness that we saw from Snout at the beginning, because Snout seems absolutely like he's lost it when you first see him, and then by the end, Chris has become very similar to that character. Yeah. He's walking around in his pants. He's just sort of like, he looks sick.
Yeah.
And he has that moment where there's lots of different Haris, and he's kind of imagining if there were lots of them, which one would be the Hari, which is my Hari, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he's just all lost in his own thoughts and his memories of the past.
So how does it end? I know how it exactly ends, but how do we get to that? So it actually ends with, it looks like Chris goes home and we see him go back to his father's house, and he kind of like falls. His father's house is leaking really intensely.
Yeah.
And he's watching in through the window, and then his dad comes out and he drops to his knees. How do we get there though? What happens immediately before that scene?
So before that scene, Hari there's a letter which is given by Snout to Chris, and it basically says that Hari has. So what's been happening in the meantime is Chris has been going through these experiments with Snout, and he's been transporting his memories to the ocean of Solaris.
Oh yeah, an encephalogram.
That's it. Yeah. That weird word. So he's been transporting his thoughts and his memories in an attempt to communicate.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of done something. There's been like islands popping up on the ocean, and he's sort of like he doesn't care about this because he's just focused on his life with Hari on the station. But then Hari leaves him this letter saying, I've talked to it, and I've said, can you just can you let me like die basically? So, and don't bring me back. So that moment, Chris knows that Hari isn't going to come back, at least seemingly from the looks of it, because she's made some sort of agreement with this entity through the letter.
So again, it comes back to like who's got consciousness in this, because that sounds like, I mean, I think we can believe that Hari becomes her own sentient conscious entity, even though she might have started life as a projection based on Chris's memories. Now it sounds like she's having a dialogue with the planet, which suggests that it's less of a sort of reactionary, evolutionary response to human beings' thought patterns, and actually there's more agency in the planet itself. It's a life form that is
But it's
capable of some form of
gained
communication.
that agency through its interaction with Chris, hasn't it?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or it's just learned a way to communicate with humans that both parties can understand, right? It may have always had agency, but it's a planet where its primary form of life is an ocean.
Yeah.
You know, that thing might have no concept of speaking to a tiny human, but Hari's become this vessel of translation between the two.
Yeah, yeah.
That's kind of what I wanted it to be. And I'm not convinced that is literally what it is. That's the more traditional sci-fi working of that plot in my mind. And that's kind of what I wanted from it. I'm not a great fan of the metaphysical Tarkovsky surrealness. And I kind of wanted a more straight down the line sci-fi movie from it. And maybe I should rewatch the remake. Maybe they do a bit more with that.
Yeah, I could imagine they probably keep it a bit more down the line with the remake.
I've definitely seen it, and it was also quite boring.
Yeah, I mean, it looks pretty bad from my perspective. But yeah, it's like, because the whole film, it's kind of just using the sci-fi elements as a backdrop, isn't it?
Definitely.
Because it's more about connecting to other people and not going to these other worlds. They're searching for connections, not really searching for sort of like other life. The only reason that people want to sort of like go to these places is to find out more about us. So what we always say, what they always say is like, we want to go to space to find out more about ourselves, who we are, where we came from, that kind of thing. This is sort of looking at it more from, we need to look at our own connections to other people in order to learn more about ourselves. So it's using all of that space element as a backdrop to this sort of core theme.
Snout says something really interesting about that. He basically says towards the end of the film that humans don't want to explore. We actually just want to extend the Earth further.
Yeah.
So I wondered if with that they were sort of saying that there's an inherent connection with nature. And I think Chris's dad says something like this at the start of the film. The Earth has learned to deal with people like you, but other planets won't be able to.
Yeah.
So we've got this sort of fragile balance on Earth with nature. And then when we're confronted with a different kind of nature, there's difficulty in us joining up with it in the same way that we do on Earth.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely, washing your hands in the lake. It's all about this natural connection we have that's just sort of built into humans. And then you're faced with an ocean that we can't form a connection with, or it's really, it's a 3-hour film trying to form a connection with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was Snout's kind of opinion of it all, was like, well, we don't actually want to explore, we just want to extend the Earth further out, which is kind of an interesting idea of like colonialism, but a sort of obsession with nature meets colonialism.
Yeah, and that's a great line. And you're right, it does sum up kind of what Tarkovsky's obviously going for with this film, and it does sort of like clarify a bit more of the meaning, maybe.
Yeah.
It ends with Chris looking like he's gone back to Earth, doesn't it? He's back at his dad's house. You said about the leaking. But then what happens? What do we find out?
He falls to his knees. His dad comes out to greet him and he falls to his knees, and they don't say anything, but he looks very upset. And then the camera, it kind of tracks out and zooms out, and then the fog starts to cloud in, and it's like a big twist ending. Then it zooms out a little bit further, and the cabin that we thought was his childhood home is actually one of these islands that popped up on the oceans of Solaris following his encephalogram communication, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a proper Logan's Run,
Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, 1970s sci-fi twist.
Yeah. But I love that moment as well. And it's kind of like he's still living in his memories. He's still living in that sort of like, he can't go back and sort of live his life back on Earth now. He has to sort of live his life almost vicariously through these sort of images of his past.
He can't come to any resolution over his grief, right?
That's it. He can't come to any resolution over his grief. So he's just constantly reliving these memories and he can't move on. But he's kind of finding forgiveness in that as well, isn't he? because he's sort of like, he's happy to see this version of his dad, and he's kind of like, did you look at it as an optimistic end or?
No, I think when you look at it from like the Tarkovsky memory side of things, this is a guy who has just completely been consumed by his grief and his memory, and he's just gone all in on that, and he's kind of given himself over to that sort of constant sense of reflection, and he doesn't grow as a person, not really. He's been grieving his wife since she died, and ultimately he decides to, I think he's decided to. I guess the other side of the coin is, if we're talking about like the agency of the life on Solaris, what does Solaris get out of that? Does Solaris want people to stay with it?
Yeah.
It kind of seems to. It's doing all this work to engage with people and converse with people in some way. And in Chris, it's found the perfect guy for the job, right? He's formed this connection with Hari that no other subject has been able to reach that connection. It's always been like, well, I'm the ocean. I can form a giant baby of a guy that you know.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Do you want to stay and live here forever? I've formed a little person, and you have some weird connection with him, mad scientist. Why don't you do experiments maybe?
Yeah.
And it's sort of working. And then Hari's like the perfect culmination of all of that. Does Solaris want to like draw people in? Is it just lonely?
Yeah.
Just want company?
And is it kind of like, so Chris, if he went back anyway, would his life be better or would it not? If he's staying on Solaris, he's making his own life and he's embracing this life that Solaris is creating. So he's not the cynical man that who was there at the start, who was like, who looked at life in a different way. He was only ever looking at reflections. He couldn't look at anything.
Yeah.
At the end of it, he's in this world which is made up of like his own kind of creations, and he's almost made it himself through his own mind and his memory. So it's like, is that a bad thing, or is that sort of like him embracing life a bit more?
You're putting it as like a kind of positive spin, but I don't see it like that at all. Like,
he's trapped in a reflection world is what you're thinking of it.
Yeah, he's not dealing with the real world.
Yeah.
He's choosing to live a life that's constructed from his memories because he wants to dwell on those memories. And you're saying there's something positive about making that decision and sort of moving forward with your life on your own terms. I do get what you mean.
Yeah.
But I felt very negative at his choice at the end of that
oh
film.
no, he's trapped.
Trapped maybe, or trapped himself and giving himself over to being trapped. It felt very bleak.
Yeah. I mean, I like to try and look at things in a positive way whenever I can. But yeah, no, it does sort of like, it lends itself to that viewing. But I think it's always interesting to look at it from a different spin as well, just to see what other ways you can view it.
I'd really like to read the book. I'd like to know if the book takes a more down the line 1970s pulpy sci-fi story approach to it.
Yeah.
And then Tarkovsky got his hands on it and said, what if it was all about memories? Which I totally respect. I do think he's very good at that. But I'd love to kind of experience the more campy version of this, right? Where there's a planet with a living ocean that wants to talk to us.
Make it a bit more space opera-y, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because when I think of living planets, I think of like Guardians of the Galaxy.
I knew you were going to say that, because every time you said living planet, I kept thinking of that.
And there's one in, isn't there a Green Lantern that's a planet?
Yep, it's happened in Green Lantern. The one in the Marvel Universe is used all the time in different things.
Right, yeah. Who plays him?
Kurt Russell?
Kurt Russell, yeah. He's like the manifestation. I mean, I quite want to go back and watch Guardians of the Galaxy 2 after Solaris, to see, because it is like there's the
Some
one
light
manifestation.
Relief. Yeah.
I was also, it really reminded me of Moon when Chris first arrives and he's set on his mission and he's just trying to get like a straight answer out of Snout. And Snout's like, could you leave me alone? I'm really busy. Don't talk to anyone. You got to go and figure stuff out. It really felt like when Sam is interacting with himself and the newer one is like, we got to find the clone room. And the other one's like, no, I got carving to do and I'm going home soon. It was the frustration of like, when one character is aware of just how insane everything is and someone else is just not engaging with that, and the frustration that character's feeling as like, I'm the only sane guy in the room. I definitely saw like a bit of a connection there.
Yeah.
It's compared to 2001, isn't it?
Yeah. Apparently Tarkovsky did not like that comparison because
Yeah.
he considered 2001 to be like a sterile film, and he saw it after he'd made Solaris, apparently.
Right. And a lot of people make that criticism.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think criticism is the right word because I do think it's quite a sterile film.
Yeah.
And I think that's very carefully, deliberately done.
Exactly. It's Kubrick. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Whereas Tarkovsky is a...
It's all about emotion
Yeah.
and gushing, like I've gushed over this film.
So you liked it?
I liked it. I really liked it.
I like it too, and I would recommend it. Do you know what though? I think that there's a 90-minute edit in there, and I don't care how blasphemous that sounds. You can carve wonderful 90 minutes out of this film, and it would be the best sci-fi film ever.
So Solaris is about memory and sort of like how you view memory, and then Tarkovsky does all these things to sort of like view different parts of it in different ways with the sort of like color and all that kind of stuff. And another film that's sort of dealing with memory is Europa Report, but it does it in a different way. It's a found footage sci-fi film.
Yeah.
So I think now's a good time to delve into that one.
Yeah.
Good morning. We are all very excited to be here today. This really is a new first step for mankind.
I would hope we keep looking for the answers to those really tough questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? And are we alone?
Internal cam check is a go.
Our craft was heading for a moon of Jupiter, known as Europa.
Yeah, my boy's gonna be 6 when I see him again.
So proud of you.
Oxygen is flowing, we're good.
Commencing egress. This never gets old.
So Europa Report. Who's the director of this one? Sebastián
Cordero.
Cordero. 2013. I'd never heard of it. Never even heard of it before we started doing research for this series.
Yeah.
What did you think of it?
I thought it was good.
I thought it was amazing.
Yeah. I thought you would like it.
Yeah, because it's short and simple.
Yeah. Short, simple, punchy.
But built around one great concept. There's not too many things going on in here, and it's a really sci-fi concept.
It was a nice sort of palate cleanser.
Yeah.
After
a disgusting meal. No, I don't mean that.
a disgusting meal.
After a
heavy meal.
A heavy meal, too heavy, yeah.
You've had a really heavy meal. You want something like a bit lighter next time round. So here we have Europa Report. So like I said, it's a found footage film. And so what did you think of it? And what are your experiences of found footage films first?
Horror, almost
Horror.
exclusively. I was
All the time.
expecting this to be a much more straight down the line horror movie. I wouldn't. I don't think I'd classify it as horror. I feel like if you asked our friend Mike from the Evolution of Horror podcast, is this film horror? He would say emphatically yes.
He'll say there are definitely horror elements in it, but I
Yeah.
think it treats it in a different way. And
I
there are
don't-
bits which are supposed to be scary.
It's
but
hugely tense, but I don't think this film's out to scare you, frighten you, get inside your head in a creepy way.
yeah, because it could have easily gone down the sci-fi horror route. couldn't
Very
it?
much so. And I think that there's another movie you could make with an incredibly similar plot and move it more towards a horror film, and it would still be a good film.
Yeah,
But I'm kind of glad they didn't do that because it took me by surprise a little bit.
yeah. So when we talk about found footage films, what are the ones which sort of stick in your head? So we talked about horror ones. So obviously Blair Witch.
Blair Witch, which is one of my favourite horror films, I'd say. And Paranormal Activity, which I also
Yep.
think is very, very good. And then just like a load of shit ones. Like
But
what
like
else is there?
Cloverfield.
Cloverfield's a good film.
Cloverfield's like
Yeah.
the one sci-fi
yeah.
found footage one that I can think of other than this.
And a very impressive effort to make like an action found footage film, which must be
Yeah.
very challenging.
Definitely.
And what's another? Rex, quite good.
Yeah, Wreck's good as well.
It's like a zombie film, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's usually, like I said, it's usually used as a device for telling horror stories, basically. But here we are with Europa Report, and it's kind of like a mystery, isn't it? It's like you don't know what's happened to these astronauts, and the chronology of the film is a bit sort of like all over the place at the start, isn't it?
Yeah, it drops you in quite fast. I wasn't struggling a little bit in the first half an hour to just make sure I knew what had happened. Someone had died quite early on, and I wasn't sure who, and it all runs at quite a pace. But then it after about 20 minutes, half an hour, it really like takes its foot off the pedal and says, here's what's happening. It's less than that. It's quicker than that, isn't it? It's like 15 minutes in, they're like, you start to get the talking heads, which I thought were used incredibly well.
Yeah.
And just the right amount. So it's it feels a bit like a Netflix documentary.
Yeah, it's like a something you'd see on Discovery or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, has those kind of vibes to it.
So the premise is that so the Europa is the name of the moon they're going to, and I think also the name of the ship they're on.
So it's a moon of Jupiter, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're on Europa 1. And I think this is based on some real science.
Yep. It's all sort of like theorized that Europa would be potentially a bit like this.
Yeah, that there's possibly more than anywhere else in our solar system life on Europa.
Yeah, because it's like a heated core or something, they reckon.
Yeah, they've found ice. Have they found ice?
I'm not sure.
In real life, I don't know. But the premise being that there's ice all over the moon, and there's also a particular area of volcanic activity under the ice that would have the right circumstances for life. So Europa 1 is the private company spaceship that's been sent there. It's not it's not a government agency.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting it was privately funded as well. So it's got so when we looked at Destination Moon, that was funded by American industry. So this is funded by a group of rich billionaires, presumably, or something like that, or a big company.
Well, it mostly reminded me of SpaceX, and I don't know what SpaceX were doing 7 years ago. I can't really remember the timeline of SpaceX, but it does fit into the kind of the overall story that we looked at with, Apollo 13, the Apollo missions.
Yeah.
Everyone lost interest after the moon landings. The space shuttle program lasted for a very long time, but it was nowhere near the scale of the Apollo missions that were going to the moon. So Europa Report's ship is presented as it's private industry, and we're taking the reins now, and we're going to do so much more than the Apollo missions ever did. But they've gone missing at the start of the movie, and this is where it's quite fast paced and a bit you don't know what's going on. All you know is this mission disappeared and went missing. And I guess the reason I was expecting more horror is not just the found footage, but that feels like the start of Event Horizon, which is horror, terrifying.
Yeah.
And a great horror concept of being, lost in space, but not in an adventurous, exciting way, but in a terrifying, cut off from everyone, you don't even know what's out there kind of way.
Yeah. And it does sort of it plays on bits like that in this film, but it does it in a more matter-of-fact, this could actually happen kind of way.
And I think dropping in the character James, is that his name?
Yes.
Charlton.
Yeah.
We find out
the
later.
guy who was
Charlton.
in District 9.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Chappie. Is he in Chappie?
Yeah, he's in Chappie as well.
Yeah, he's the one who died, and I guess dropping that in early kind of builds up the horror tension because, you're kind of primed with all of this found footage, Event Horizon. One of the characters is dead in a mysterious way that we don't understand yet. Your mind runs away a little bit ahead of the film. And then, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but the way he dies is completely tragic and sad and very naturalistic, and it's not played for horror in any way, apart from the horror of the way he dies, which is horrible.
So before we sort of jump into sort of the deaths and sort of how the story progresses then, what did you think of the actual way they presented the found footage? So I really liked the fact that they'd obviously worked out where all the cameras would be in the spaceship. And in a lot of these found footage films, you get shaky cam.
Yeah.
But this was really nicely done because it's all stable cameras. So it's just static shots from different places. They do sort of do a few zooms here and there, but predominantly it's just really weird cuts around spaces.
Yeah.
But they can get away with it because of the way the cameras are positioned.
Yeah, and you get maybe 2 scenes where it's body cam footage.
Those scenes were great as well.
Yeah, so it's you do get that sort of shaky cam thing.
Yeah, but you get the extreme close-ups as well.
The close-ups were good. That's how they kind of got around that. First of all, not using too much of the body cam, and secondly, when characters are outside of the ship, it's camera inside their helmet looking at them, which is very, very frustrating, but in a good way.
Yeah,
because they are very closely controlling what you're allowed to see and how much you're allowed to see, and actually most of the time in the crazy intense scenes, you're just getting pretty much just the character's eyes filling the screen.
And this idea of having cameras around the ship is something we're seeing more and more as we're going through the series. So like we talked about Destination Moon, they had a camera outside where they were viewing the launch. And this has cameras all around the ship. So the astronauts can see what's going on a little bit, so they can kind of get a bit of an idea of what's going on outside the spaceship.
Yeah, CCTV and like video logs are kind of wound up in the DNA of this type of sci-fi film. So, and for that reason, found footage is actually a really good tool to use for this kind of film. And I'm surprised it took so long to make such a good sci-fi movie set in space with found footage.
Exactly.
On top of that, they've also got the talking heads as well. So we mentioned that it's like a Discovery Channel documentary. So we're using the found footage, and it's like we can finally sort of tell the story of the Europa mission that went missing however long ago. But they just drop in every now and again characters who are on Earth, and they're kind of just giving a bit of background, telling us about why they went there, the heated ice. There's the kind of main scientist guy, and there's the mission director. Is that her role? It's
Dr. Unger. Yeah, Esbeth.
Embeth.
So she's the woman from Bicentennial Man, isn't she?
Yeah, Bicentennial Man.
Yeah.
And Matilda's teacher.
Matilda's teacher, yes. Miss Honey.
Yeah. Yeah, she's very good in this.
Yeah.
She doesn't have a very big role, but she's kind of the main talking head person that we cut to. We also cut a lot to Rosa, who is the pilot, the main pilot.
Yeah, she's kind of our protagonist, isn't she?
Yeah, as much as anyone, yeah. She has like a talking head role in the movie, which towards the end of the movie, I was starting to think like, oh, do they survive?
Because it really confused me that, actually.
Yeah, it feels like she's in the same time period as Embeth Davitt's character, the scientist mission control guy.
Because they also make it so that she's the only one who you see those kind of footage bits from.
Yeah, and she's talking in the past tense. She's telling the story of the trip. So this is what happened. And it's like, oh, she's kind of looking like she's going to get out of this all right. And then it's quite sad at the end of the film. She says, and that brings us up to now. And you realise she's just like sat down and recorded a whole document of the journey to send home, that knowing that it might not go well from this point.
Yeah. It's like that was a real shocker for me as well, because I kept expecting her to be all right by the end of it.
Yeah, it took me by surprise. Yeah. It's very good. It's not like a twist. It's just like it does subvert what you think's going on in a really satisfying way.
In the same way we talked about the sort of sci-fi horror elements they could have gone down. The film plays it more as a kind of like an Apollo 13 mission or something like that.
It is a bit, yeah.
Yeah. So what are the things which go wrong? Because basically there's quite a few bits. It's more about what happens to the ship, and that causes the deaths, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But there's also like another alien entity as like another subplot, but it seemed more as the background to the story of what they're actually doing on the ship, doesn't it?
Yeah. The primary thing that goes wrong is they lose communications. It's a total fluke. There's a solar flare, solar storm,
yeah.
And it frazzles their communications, which is a real thing. Did you? Apparently, there's like a massive. The last big solar storm we had, and they happen very regularly. But it's all. I think it's to do with like we have to be on the right side of the sun and stuff like this. And when I say regularly, it's every, in terms of decades or even more than that. But there was one in like the late 1800s, and like all telegrams, everything that was electronic at that time just went down.
Whoa.
So it's like if there was another one and we were in the sort of firing line of it, we would have like it would be devastating. Jeez. And it's also, I think it's like one of those things that's just like, well, it's just kind of a matter of time. And
like the Y2K bug kind of thing.
Kind of.
Like planes falling out of the sky.
I don't know about that sort of level, but like you would not have the internet instantly.
Oh, I mean, it's bad enough when you lose it for like an hour and bloody Virgin go out of loop or whatever.
So that hits the ship, and the two engineer characters who are Michael Nyqvist and Sharlto Copley, they have to go out and fix it. But at this point, it's not too serious. It's still quite routine, and things just go wrong. It's just a fluke. They kind of get thrown off balance. Andrei, the chief engineer, gets a rip in his suit. James gets coated in some sort of fuel or something.
But the way they play it as well, because initially Andrei gets the rip and you think that's going to be the problem. And then they get to the hatch And then that's when James realizes he's covered in this sort of like fluid, this engine fluid or something.
Yeah, so Andrei's got seconds to live because he's losing oxygen, but James can't physically go in because that's a contaminant that will threaten the rest of the crew. And they don't have time. And there's a moment where you think Andrei's saying he's going to get him out of his suit, and you think, oh my God, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And then they all just sort of go, it's too late.
Can't do it.
And James forces him into the airlock, which causes him to fly backwards, and that's that.
Yeah, but the way they play it, because it's just, again, it plays with your expectations. You think, oh, Andrei's going to be the one who's going to die.
Yeah.
And then suddenly James can't get into the airlock. And then, you're presented with this shot of him just disappearing off into nothingness as he drifts off into space, which is like the biggest fear in these space films, is like being lost out in the vacuum.
And also still being in full communication.
Yeah.
And having like a full conversation with everyone back on board. And he says like, so he's got time to say, it's not your fault, guys. And, tell my family I love them and all of that.
And that's when that beautiful body cam shot comes in as well, doesn't it?
Where you just see his hands in front of him.
Yeah, and then you've got the spaceship just going further and further out of frame until it's completely gone.
Yeah.
And then you can't hear him breathe anymore. It's just, it's really like hard to watch.
It's great. It's very good.
James?
Yeah, I'm here. Christ, I'm gone. Oh, shit.
But that's the primary thing that goes wrong with the Europa mission, right? That's how they've lost communication. That's how Embeth Davids' character lost the mission, and everything else that happens is news to Earth, basically. So they get to Europa.
Yep. So they land on Europa after James has died,
and things start to go wrong again. More things go wrong once they're on Europa.
Yeah, so they're trying to drill into the ice, aren't they? Because they know there's water underneath in these big trenches. So they're trying to find out if there could be any life under there. So there's lots of sort of things that come up. They don't land in quite the right spot, so they can't get an easy access.
So they decide to drill, but they've got a fundamental problem, which is like we're not on top of the volcanic activity. So anything we drill and look into we're not expecting to find anything. It's basically useless. But they do drill down. They decide to drill through, but then there's loads of radiation underneath the ocean where there shouldn't be, because they're only expecting radiation from above. And that fries their probe under the water, doesn't it? What did you think of the way they were like showing the underwater world through the camera?
I thought it was really good. I loved the way they're sort of like, it's sort of like mirroring space, isn't it? But you've got this ice on the top of the surface.
Yeah.
So it's that fear of the unknown. You don't know what's going to be underneath there. And because they say how vast it is, you literally don't know what's going to happen. You kind of like, they're just bobbing along the surface bit, and they go further down in this probe that they're looking in sort of remotely. And then it sort of adds to the mystery and the sort of fear of it.
Yeah, and the camera, as they're going down, the camera starts to go a bit jumpy and distorted. And this is a great effect that like it signifies tension about to happen for the rest of the film. So their camera equipment that we're seeing the found footage through is affected by radiation. But that's not a huge problem because, we're expecting some radiation because there's no atmosphere or whatever. But then when we start to find out that there's radiation coming from below that's unexplained, that's when the flickering of the cameras becomes a bit of a signifier for something bad's about to happen.
Yeah, so every time that happens, you start getting on the edge of your seat. You're like, oh, something bad's going to happen now.
Yeah.
And again, it's a great device they've used with the found footage, because by having that camera flicker, it's a really nice narrative device, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's simple.
And it's something that the characters themselves aren't paying much attention to because they're not watching. So what happens next is that one of them insists on going out on her own, and she's going to go to where the warmth is and do research there because they've lost their probe. We're seeing through the found footage that as she gets further and further and she's drawn in by this like bioluminescence, we're seeing the flickering, and we know that something bad's about to happen. But the characters are not watching a live feed. They're just talking to her through like radios and stuff.
Yeah. And
trying to like direct it as you would a mission. And we know that like it's getting bad. Even though they are sort of monitoring the radiation and stuff. It's like we've learned that the flickering camera
That's
It's very foreboding, you know.
Yeah, and she sinks into the ice, doesn't she? She sinks into the sea underneath.
Yeah, it's crazy. And again, we only really see it from looking at her face, and you kind of know what's happening because they're all yelling, and we know she's on ice and it's shifting and it's dangerous, but it's not confirmed until you see like the digital readout of her location is literally like beep, 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 beep.
Yeah. And then it cuts to those extreme close-ups, because the extreme close-up of the face every time is, you know, something bad's going to happen. You can see the emotion in their faces. It's a really nice way of being able to do that and cut to it. So her face, you see in her reflection, there's a light.
Yeah, and you're like staring, like
you're trying to figure out what the hell is that thing that she's seeing.
And she's so wide-eyed. She's terrified, but she's also like completely transfixed by whatever it is she's looking at. But that's all you get.
Yeah.
You see that?
Where the ice is less deteriorated, just set up in the middle of that.
Here?
Exactly.
She must have been out there for an hour. But it felt like an eternity.
And I mean, what's happened really is the ice has fallen and she's fallen into this trench.
Yeah.
There's been no sort of like there's this alien presence, this weird light that they keep seeing and the radiation, but it's not a sort of like stalk and kill kind of alien presence.
No, at this point she's just confirmed that there's like single cell life, and that for the mission is like spectacular. Like, we have discovered alien life. It's a single cell organism. And then it's immediately kicked up a notch with the bioluminescence because it's reacting to her light. And they're like, well, that's a whole other level of complexity than a single cell life. But we're still looking at it as it's some bioluminescent bacteria or algae or whatever. We're not expecting a big monster under the ocean. And we don't see that at all at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And they could have easily played it like this alien's coming to get them, and that's what's going to pick off all of these members of the crew.
Yeah, like Pitch Black. It could have become a bit of a Pitch Black sort of film.
Yeah, but they've made a decision to be, no, these are just like the worst things that will happen to you are probably more likely to be malfunctions in the machinery, and they'll lead to these kind of problems.
Yeah, this hostile environment that we've got. Yeah,
and then this alien life form's just another thing on top of that.
Yeah, and they do a fairly good job with there's kind of a bit of a Prometheus Covenant vibe in that you've got these incredibly intelligent, well-trained astronauts that make very bad decisions. Well, just her really, just that catchier character who... It's very frustrating to see a character that's like still going. You're like, go back. You've been told to go back, and you know full well how dangerous it is. And sometimes that can be very badly done, like Prometheus and Covenant. This film does it quite well, and I think those close-ups of her face help with that, because it's not, she doesn't quite go insane, but it's that mad grip on needing to just go a little bit further and push the exploration, and being so close to a massive discovery that she's putting her life on the line and makes a really bad decision.
What did you think of the fact that there were 6 astronauts in this one as well? Because the other films we've seen, there's only been like a maximum of 4, I think it is.
Yeah, I think they make a point about the idea of deep space travel, including human life, just magnifies how complicated it becomes. And I think there's a sense of like, we're sending out a bit of a familial unit or a bit of a community, because that's part of allowing these astronauts something to keep them sane.
And they're all like, they're from a pool of people all over the world, aren't they? So they're all supposed to be like different nationalities, I guessed. But they all sort of speak American. They're like got American accents, really.
Yeah, Andrei and Rosa talk to each other in Russian or another Eastern European language a couple of times.
Yeah, it was tricky that, because I felt like they could have made more of an effort if it is sort of like this mission where it's all of the world coming together to do this.
Yeah.
Then they could have made a bit more of an effort to be like, these are the different nationalities. We're all together.
Yeah. In terms
just
of
felt
language,
like Russians and some Americans.
yeah. And yeah, that is a good point, because Sharlto Copley's talking with an American accent, which is not his accent. So yeah, he could have been the South African guy.
Yeah, but I can see sort of like when you're marketing a film to a big audience, you want to hit America, so you want to make it like that.
And certainly if you were organising that mission, every person you choose needs to be able to speak a common language. It doesn't necessarily have to be English. It could have been a sort of a mission run on the other side of the planet where all of them speak Chinese, and maybe they come from different Asian countries, but they would all need to speak Chinese or one language because they're together for 20 months.
Yeah, so it makes more sense for them to communicate easily or as easily as possible.
Well, and that's 20 months one way. It's going to be, they've got to come back.
Exactly.
So they would all need to speak the same language, wouldn't they?
Yeah. And I love the way that they presented them all in the spaceship. So you've got the two main pilots, and then you've got the four people behind them. And the way that the ship is, they've got two at the front, and then there's four, but they're all sort of like sat, is it horizontally?
The two pilots would be sat horizontally.
Yep.
And then below them, if the ship was standing up for liftoff, the four people are sat 90 degrees.
90 degrees. It's hard to explain in a podcast, but do have a look at the images online because it's a really clever way of sort of depicting this spaceship. It just looks visually really nice.
It looks very nice, but it's also it's kind of a setup for the way one of the characters dies later. Someone falls through that gap and into the central bit when everything goes wrong towards the end of the film.
And also it's a nice little device that they use at the start when they're flashing up these images of what happened. If you look, there's less people in the far part of the shot in certain shots.
Is there?
Because they're losing crew members.
Yeah.
And seeing that in the background kind of means that you always remember that part of the team have already died.
Yeah. So what did you think of the characters, the types of people that were on this mission?
I found it a little bit difficult, at least at the start, to really sort of differentiate between all the different people on the ship. It sort of like became more apparent as it went on, but because you didn't have that much of a background to any of them, you didn't have that kind of emotional connection. I mean, you're doing it in an hour and a half film, so obviously there are constraints there, but comparing it to something like Apollo 13, you've got all this background of, you know who these characters are, you're invested in them. There wasn't as much investment in each of the characters in this. You get like little sort of snippets of them. The only person they kind of do a bit of investment in is James, because his character's shown to be like videoing and sending messages to his wife and his kids. You don't really hear about any of the others' family or sort of what they're hoping for. Katya, you've got her sort of need to find, she wants to go on the ground. She wants to find out if there's sort of marine life in this trench. And for the others, you don't really get as much from.
Yeah, I agree. But I think that happens because it's coming from a different starting point, I guess. Like Apollo 13 is all emotional character build up, and I found that a bit frustrating because you know what's going to happen, and I just kind of wanted to get there. Whereas this one comes straight in with, it's not interested in building up the characters. It's hitting you with mystery, first of all. It's like you get a basic setup of a ship disappearing, and then you don't really know what's going on for 15 minutes. In terms of, I didn't have a problem. I like that, to be honest. I thought it worked really well. And they get around it for me by, they just do a quick interview, talking heads thing, showing how they got selected. So you get given their names, their job on the ship, which is really useful for just understanding what things are happening later in the film, because you know whose job is what. And they give like sort of one sentence intro. It's pretty unemotional, and it's very what's the word? Just economical storytelling, right? Yeah. It's just like, right, these are your 6 guys. You got less than 5 minutes. Just learn their names. These are their jobs, and you're not really going to get any more.
And in that way, it kind of like goes along the sort of more traditional horror sort of narrative, because in horror films, you don't really have a connection to a lot of the characters a lot of the time because they're all going to be picked off one by one. Yeah. And that's kind of what happens with this. But I think probably it's just interesting seeing that from a space film, that they haven't got this sort of build up of character as much, but they don't necessarily need it in this film because that's not what this one's about. Yeah.
You're right about the kind of, it's structured like a horror film. And I wonder how much of it is conscious. I think this film would be quite disappointing to some people. Like, I was very happy to be surprised that it wasn't a horror film. That was a very pleasant surprise, and it goes off in a completely different direction. but certainly I expect it's probably marketed a bit like a horror film. It feels like a horror film. It's playing with a lot of horror tropes like that, the way the characters are introduced, everything else that's going on. You're expecting a big scary alien to stalk these people and kill them, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a subset of the audience that would be quite disappointed that that's not what happens.
But I loved the fact they flipped it and they told this different tale.
I think that's the strongest part of it, is that it's much more about exploration in lots of different ways. And they're all really committed explorers, aren't they? Rosa has that incredible moment at the end of the film where her duty to the scientific exploration is like fully intact, even though she knows she's about to die at the very end.
Yeah, because they're all about the mission, aren't they? Everybody on that ship wants... So they finally found life. They found proof of existence of another sentient creature in the universe. And all they want to do is make sure that they can get that back to Earth so people know about it. And especially by the end of the film, after all of the other characters have been killed through various means, all that Rosa wants to do is be able to get that communication sent to Earth so people know what happened and know there is some sort of life out there.
Yeah, but her and Andrei are able to switch to that way of thinking very, very quickly, because immediately before that, they've got kind of a last-ditch effort. They still think they might be able to take off. They can repair the engines and they might be able to get off Europa. And then I think that guy just slips and falls. There's like a tremor or a quake, and the guy just dies. And then it's very much like, we don't have enough people now or time to repair the ship. But Andrei is able to go, well, I've got one other idea. We can just repair communications and send all of this information back to Earth. And both of those two characters alive are able to very quickly just be like, yep, okay, yep, that's the mission now. All hope is lost, but we can get a message back to Earth. And I guess that's kind of, they've built up to that a little bit with, we've just found out that just before that, Rosa had recorded her kind of last message that we thought was a talking head. So she's ready for that possibility. And even on top of that, as she's dying, she blows open the airlock, doesn't she? So that the cameras will capture anything that might come in. Yeah. Which will be even more evidence to go back to Earth. And it does reveal that monstrous alien creature.
That final image, which is like a sort of like, it's like a weird squid, isn't it?
It looks like the seek and destroy squids from The Matrix.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's based on a kind of idea of what that kind of life would look like based on what we have on Earth. Because you get these bioluminescent sort of like squids and things like that living underneath the ocean. So why wouldn't they live on Europa if they're in that kind of environment?
Yeah, and they still manage to end the film on a really positive note off the back of that. So everything goes wrong, everyone dies, and I think it's the way it's presented as like a sort of documentary, isn't it? That's how they're able to put the positive spin on it.
Yeah, because they've managed to get this footage to Earth. People know about it and they're talking about it. And the film's presented as the released declassified footage of their mission. So they're allowed to tell this story to people so they can know that these people did this and they actually found something.
Yeah, it's a bit of a leap of faith, suspension of disbelief, because this film is so close to being exactly what this kind of documentary would look like if this mission happened, right? There's just the fact that people died, right? You would never show that footage of Charlotte Copley's character drifting off into space, and you know that's horrifying. Like that was a real person.
Can you imagine if that was like a documentary on Discovery and you're watching that happen?
But by the same measure, it's a fictional film. You've got to give it that leeway.
Yeah,
I do think that up to a certain point, they would show stuff like that. You would never see someone die. A real person die. It's too tragic that would make it into a documentary. But, you know, it would go up to a point of some footage of them repairing outside before
so you know what's going to happen anyway. And sometimes that's scarier, isn't it? Yeah. Sort of the idea of what's going to happen.
And, you know, in that sort of situation, I can see it would be like, maybe we wouldn't see a character die, but we would cut back to a talking head who would explain how they died. You know, cut out the real graphic stuff. But at the same time, the very ending, I can see like you would make a documentary and it's such a tragic event that they would have to bring out the positives in the end. So we go back to Embeth Davids, who explains that, like, well, they found proof of alien life. This is a huge success. And they all, they understood the sacrifice they might have to make. And they were all very brave scientists committed to exploration, and they succeeded.
So all in all, you really enjoyed the Europa Report then?
Yeah, I loved it. I will watch that again. And I think in time I will watch Solaris again.
Yeah. And I think also the fact that Europa Report's another independent film.
Yeah.
So again, it's like Moon in that respect. And there's something to be said for these independent sci-fi films which have really done something a little bit different, and the impact they've had on sort of sci-fi cinema. Yeah.
I love to see real hard work showing through, limitations of budget and stuff like that, even though, I think that's there in Solaris as well. But
yeah,
I love these tight little indie sci-fis.
Definitely. There's something to be said for those.
But it sounds like you got a lot out of seeing Solaris for the first time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I loved Solaris.
Yeah.
You loved Europa Report. We both had a great time.
So next time, what are we going to be looking at, James?
So next time, we're going to be looking at the theme of getting help from above in order to get into space. So we're moving away from the 70s next week. We've got a film from the 80s for you. It's the 1985 film Explorers, directed by the great Joe Dante. Joe, who's done films like Inner Space, Gremlins, Small Soldiers, lots of great films in there. So we're going to be looking at that one. It's sort of like more of a family space film. Comedy in there.
And I understand that's a bit of a childhood classic for people our age, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, it's a bit crazy. But yeah, I'm looking forward to sort of having a look at that one.
And what's the other film?
So the other film we're going to be looking at is Contact from 1997. That's directed by Robert Zemeckis. So both films where there's some sort of message from outside of Earth drawing us into space. So there's something out there and we want to go and find it because they're basically telling us to come and find them.
Great.
Yeah. So as always, if you want to get in touch, you can find us on social media. Whereabouts on social media are we, Matt?
We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on emails. We've got a website, journeythroughsci-fi.com. What's our email?
Our email is journeythroughsci-fi@gmail.com.
And you can search for us on Instagram and Twitter, and you will find us, and Facebook.
All the usual places. And as ever, if you'd like to leave us a review or a comment, please do. It helps us sort of get recognised, get more of you lovely listeners involved, and really get the word out about the show.
Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next time.